When I graduated from college, I have to tell you, I never thought I would only be able to find work as a telemarketer with Stickby's Lawn and Garden, a large landscaping conglomerate hell-bent on weed whacking and rototilling as much of the Midwest as they could handle. Every Stickby's customer was to get a free ceramic lawn gnome crafted in Mr. Stickby's bearded image. The man was egotistical to say the least, and had an infatuation with becoming the god of lawn care. My duty was to call people and businesses in order to drum up sales out of nowhere, which went about as well as you would expect. Our computer system was outdated, and it tended to pull from an old, infrequently updated database, akin to the white pages. I'd go through all kinds of prompts trying to ascertain if the person I called had a yard in need of weeding, mulching, or other general landscaping. It was about as mind-numbingly boring as you would expect, and my ear would often ache from rubbing against a cheap headset connected to my work phone. I tended to hope that most callers wouldn't answer. It was a lot easier to just rattle off a script on their voicemail and move on. I had been working there for 2 or 3 months, and wasn't really worried about job security, as I was still looking for something I could do with my communications degree. I had about an hour left on the clock before I could go to lunch, so I rang up my next victim, Mr. Gibbons, and messed around on the new cell phone I had just bought. After 3 to 4 rings, my hopes were dashed as I heard a crackle of static on the other end. There was a roaring sound in the background, and I assumed that maybe Mr. Gibbons had just answered his phone at work.
Hello?
From the hard accent, I could tell I was talking to someone from the South. Hi, is this Mr. Gibbons? I tended to lead with the customer's name before introducing myself. It gave me the chance to confirm their identity before they would just most likely hang up on me.
Mr. Gibbons? Mr. Gibbons? Oh, he's kind of here, but not entirely in one piece. Hold on, I'll grab his ear.
I thought this was an odd exchange, but the only people who tended to answer the phone for an unknown number during the middle of the day tended to be elderly folk or people who were just lonely. There were plenty of times I would attempt to sell someone a service only to be stuck on the phone for 15 minutes. Hearing about a friend or loved one who had recently passed, I'd bite my tongue hoping it would end in a sale, but it usually didn't, so I waited for Mr. Gibbons. At the very worst, I would feel a few minutes closer to lunch, and I was getting hungry. I heard some shuffling on the other end, and what sounded like someone being dragged across the receiver. Mr. Gibbons? I asked. The other voice came back, hollering a bit and laughing.
The darn thing don't seem to work anymore.
He said. You mean the phone? I can hear you just fine.
No, pal. His ear.
It was a weird thing to say, but I also felt like I was getting the runaround from someone who had been drinking. I couldn't really blame the guy. In a world where we don't have that much control of our surroundings, sometimes it feels good to screw with an anonymous caller, trying to sell you unsolicited garbage. Well, if Mr. Gibbons is preoccupied, may I ask who I'm speaking with?
Eddie.
The man said enthusiastically. And are you a friend or relative of Mr. Gibbons?
Wouldn't say that. I just kind of decided to saunter myself in here. You ever get that feeling, Johnny boy?
What kind of feeling?
Like just going into someone else's home and seeing what trouble you can get into?
I paused. Something was beginning to feel very off about this phone call. It also had just dawned on me that I had never given Eddie my name, which was in fact John. My parents used to call me Johnny Boy. I tried to not get freaked out by the coincidence. After all, it might have just been from a southern slang I wasn't familiar with. Johnny was one of the most common names in the world. Johnny Boy could have just been a figure of speech. I tried to stay neutral. What do you mean, Eddie?
Well, I mean that I've been through this neighborhood before, you see. And I know Mr. Gibbons here is, how would you say it, lackadaisical, with his sense of security.
I started to grip the edge of my desk and saw my knuckles grow white. Was Eddie an intruder? I didn't know what to do. My training had never covered anything like this. Pieces of the conversation from earlier were starting to come back to me. Oh, he's kind of here, but not entirely in one piece. Eddie, is Mr. Gibbons hurt or injured?
Oh, Johnny boy. Hurt? Injured? No. I cut Mr. Gibbons to ribbons.
Eddie burst out laughing, a laugh so deafening I had to take off my headset. I heard the distant sound of choking on the other end. My hands were shaking. I lurched forward in my seat and felt my shirt clinging to the back with sweat. I put the headset back on my head, even though everything in my mind was screaming to just end the call.
Why'd you think I was holding his damn ear up to the phone, Kimosabe?
I'm gonna call the police.
Johnny,
The voice became serious.
have you ever taken a chainsaw to someone before? Wasn't what I thought it would be like, you know? It was mostly smooth sailing, but you see, I got it caught in his shoulder blade, and that sound was horrible. He was screaming and screaming, of course, but the grind of this rusty saw blade on that hard bone, it was like listening to a pig squeal.
Jesus Christ. I breathed. I was feeling lightheaded. My stomach was in knots.
Ah, Johnny boy, I can tell I'm losing you. Losing you like when I cut into all those veins and arteries and saw Mr. Gibbons just empty out in seconds. I will tell you, you cannot imagine the mess here. I have to lift my boots so they don't stick to the goddamn floor.
I started dialing 911 on my cell phone. Even in my state of shock, I realized the best thing I could do was keep him talking while the police came. That way he would get caught. If all of this was a sick joke or prank, someone wouldn't be able to do it to someone else again.
So here's what we can do, Johnny. I know you're a smidge upset that Mr. Gibbons ain't around, but Mrs. Gibbons...
Oh, Jesus. I had no idea if other people could be in danger. How many were in the house? I felt so completely and utterly powerless on the end of a $15 headset, miles away from where all of this was happening. Eddie, whatever you do. I heard the faint buzz of my 911 call break through. I muted my headset.
911, what is your emergency?
Yeah, I need to report a potential murder, home invasion. The words all came out so fast that I bit my lip, tripped over my own goddamn teeth trying to get it all out of my voice, and trembled. I could hear Eddie's heavy footsteps traversing through the household in my headset.
Now Mrs. Gibbons is here, and I bet she would have a lot to say if she weren't bound under all this duct tape.
I could hear muffled screaming. I rattled off the address to the operator, who was trying her best to calm me down and failing.
I'm a gent, a true gent, but I'm starting to think it might be best if Mrs. Gibbons weren't the only one going to greener pastures. What do you think, Johnny boy?
I unmuted my headset. Please, Eddie, don't hurt anyone else. I was on the verge of tears. The operator could hear all of this, and I could hear several expletives as she started to panic at her station. It was like witnessing a car crash in slow motion, but in this case, all we could do was listen.
Oh, Johnny boy. Sometimes you just have to finish what you start.
I heard the chainsaw whirring. I yelled for him to stop, begged, but all I could hear was the deafening whine of the blade squealing as it bit into Mrs. Gibbons. I threw my headset off and threw up into my waste bucket. That night, I was called into the police station. An officer had contacted me to get my side of the events, as they had a lot of questions. I complied, full of bitterness, as I did not want to ever relive the events of that call again. I slowly pushed a half-empty cup of coffee around on the table as he asked me questions. The officer passed a black and white copy of a news article over to me from a local paper. I glanced at the headline, "Local couple found dead in grisly murder." Jeez, aren't they pushing these out a little fast? I said. The officer gave me a look that I'll never forget. Look there at the date. I did, and what I saw rattled me. The article was dated October 1st. Yeah, the day that this had happened, but October 1st, 2019. I don't understand, I said. He gave me a sad look. I don't either. Because the case had not been his, the police officer had to get into the archives to figure out what had happened, and what he told me is impossible to forget. He explained the facts of the situation to me, as best as they had been able to make sense of something that clearly made no sense. There had, indeed, been an outgoing call from my work phone to what used to be the number of the Gibbons residence. However, that phone line had been disconnected shortly after the murder had taken place in 2019. Now, I said earlier that our work database was horrendous, and that numbers frequently went unupdated for years, meaning we would often call and be told that someone no longer lived there, or that it was a wrong number. When the police arrived at the address I had given, they found no murder scene, and instead startled an elderly couple who had unknowingly purchased the house for cheap without knowing a grisly murder had occurred there a year before. They had found both Mr. and Mrs. Gibbons' mutilated bodies, yeah, but they had never found the killer, and it became a cold case. However, when they fully searched the house that day, they went into the basement and noticed a horrible smell coming from one of the walls. The homeowners thought it was a dead animal trapped somewhere. They took a sledgehammer to the wall and found a crawl space that had been closed up some time ago. Inside the space was a corpse, ripe and decayed. Written on the walls in dry blood that was found by forensics to be at least a year old, were the words, "Johnny Boy," over and over again. The operator verified that she had heard the same voice as me in the Gibbons household. It didn't have an exact date of death on the body, but I have a feeling, just a feeling, he died sometime around October of 2019. How had investigators ever known about the Gibbons murder? There had been a phone call made to 911 on October 1st, 2019. Only that time, they couldn't pull the number. Maybe because the number, my number, didn't exist yet. A male had called in, but the only words they could hear were the words, "murder, home invasion, Gibbons house." I went home and took some sedatives to knock myself out and sleep, desperate to forget everything that had transpired. Around the middle of the night, I heard my phone ring. I didn't dare answer it. This morning, I finally looked and saw that there was a 30-second voicemail waiting for me. It was from the disconnected Gibbons number. I didn't want to listen to it. I really didn't want to listen to it. But I did. There were 5 seconds of silence, and then, almost barely audible, was a voice crooning the words,
"Johnny boy. Oh, Johnny boy. I hope we meet again, and I hope it's real soon."
I no longer work at Stickby's Lawn and Garden Emporium. I no longer own a phone, and I think I'm going to take a nice, long vacation.